The auditorium held 1,200 people, and every single one of them was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes from boredom or politeness. The other kind. The kind that happens when a room collectively holds its breath because something is about to happen that cannot be taken back. Jackson Browne stood at the side of the stage with his guitar in his hand and the stage curtain between him and the audience. He could feel the crowd through the fabric. That particular weight of human attention, pressing against everything like weather. Not heat, exactly. More like pressure, the kind that builds slowly and doesn't announce itself until you're already inside it. The lights on his side were low. His guitar tech stood 3 feet away, hands folded, watching him with the patient stillness of someone who had learned to read the room by reading the person at its center. A stage manager with a headset spoke quietly into her microphone, counting something down, her voice barely audible over the low hum of the PA system doing its pre-show breathing. Cables ran across the floor in careful tape lines. A monitor wedge sat angled at the microphone stand like it was waiting to be needed. Jackson was supposed to walk out in 40 seconds. He wasn't sure he should. Not because he was afraid to perform. He'd been performing since he was 17 years old. The stage wasn't the danger. The stage was the one place in his life where things made sense, where the gap between what he felt and what he could express closed enough that he could breathe properly. The danger was what he decided to say between the songs. He'd written it out on a folded piece of paper in his jacket pocket. Not speech, not a prepared statement with sources and footnotes, just a few sentences. Plain. Direct. The kind of plain and direct that takes longer to write than elaborate prose because every word has to carry its full weight. He'd rewritten it 4 times, each time stripping away more, each time getting closer to the thing itself. The bare truth without scaffolding. The sentences were about things that had been happening in the world. About things the industry had asked him, quietly and not so quietly, to leave off stage. About the particular silence that gets enforced, not through laws or threats, but through the gentler machinery of consequence, career mathematics, and the cultivated fear of becoming someone people describe as difficult. The warning had come 48 hours earlier. Not from a stranger, not from a label executive he barely knew. Not from some faceless industry voice, from someone he respected, someone who had been in this business long enough to know how it worked, and still, somehow, still cared about the people inside it. That combination was rarer than talent. Her name was Margaret. She managed 3 acts, none of them small. She had been in the music industry for 20 years, which meant she had survived 20 years of its weather. Its reversals, its seasons of abundance, followed by the quiet withdrawals that nobody announced but everybody felt. She had sharp eyes and a measured voice, and the specific kind of calm that comes not from never being afraid, but from having already lost the things you were most afraid to lose, and discovering on the other side of that loss that you could still stand, still function, still care. She'd called him 2 days before the show. "I need to talk to you about the concert," she said. Not the music, the other thing. Jackson had known what she meant immediately. He'd been talking to people, telling anyone who'd listen about what was happening in places the news covered briefly and then moved away from. About decisions being made by people with enormous power over people with none. About the silence that surrounded those decisions like a moat. He'd been writing about it in interviews, saying it in conversations that he knew would be repeated, letting it bleed into the spaces between songs at his shows, the way something true eventually finds its way out, regardless of the door you close in front of it. And word had gotten back. "I got a call," Margaret said, "from 2 different people. Both of them asked the same thing." What did they ask? They asked if you could keep it professional. She paused. Their word, Jackson, was quiet. The word sat in the air between them, doing the work it was designed to do. "I want you to understand what that means," Margaret continued, her voice careful in the way of someone handling something fragile. "It means they're watching. It means your name is on a list. Not the blacklist. Not yet. But the other list. The one where people start having quiet conversations about whether you're worth the complication." Jackson rubbed the back of his neck. "I'm not a complication." You are right now. And I want to help you. I've always wanted to help you, but I can't help you if you make it impossible to help. Margaret, let me finish." Her voice stayed level, not angry, just clear. "I'm not asking you to lie. I'm not asking you to pretend. I'm not asking you to smile on a stage and sing songs while the world does what it does and you keep your hands clean. I'm asking you to choose your timing, to let the music do the work it has always done, to trust that the songs carry the message without you having to stand at a microphone in front of 1,200 people and say out loud the thing that everyone already knows you think." Jackson looked out the window. The city below moved like it always moved, indifferent, continuous, unconcerned with whatever was happening in any particular apartment at any particular moment. Traffic lights changed. Cars moved through them. People walked on sidewalks with their hands in their pockets and their minds somewhere else. "What happens if I say it?" he asked. Margaret was quiet for a beat longer than her previous pauses. "You lose some people, not all at once. Gradually, the way a fire loses heat. First it's fine, then it's warm, then it's cooling, then it's just ashes, and you're not sure when it stopped burning. And if I don't say it?" Another pause. This one felt heavier, like she was measuring the words. "You keep the platform," she said. "You keep the audience. You keep the access and the reach and the ability to do this again and again in rooms full of people who are still willing to listen. And maybe someday, when things have shifted, when the timing is better, you say it then. And what if the timing never gets better?" She didn't answer immediately. Then you live with the question of whether the platform was worth more silent than it would have been loud, she said. Jackson had thanked her. He told her he'd think about it. He hung up and sat in the silence of his apartment for a long time, guitar in his lap, fingers moving over strings, but not pressing down, not quite making sound, just touching the possibility of sound. He thought about Margaret, about her 20 years, about the things she'd seen and managed and survived and kept quiet about. She wasn't wrong. That was the hardest part to hold. She understood the machinery of the industry with a precision that he would never have and probably never needed. She wasn't telling him to be dishonest. She was telling him to be strategic, and strategy wasn't cowardice. Strategy was survival, and survival was how you stayed in position long enough to matter. But something in him wouldn't settle. He got up, made coffee, stood at the kitchen counter and let the silence of the apartment press around him. He thought about the specific things he'd heard, not gossip, not second-hand interpretation, specific things, real things, things happening to people in real places, while the entertainment industry went on making records and hosting parties and writing articles about the importance of authentic self-expression. He thought about what it meant to have a platform, not in the abstract, not as a concept, in the specific. What it meant that 1,200 people would sit in a room for 2 hours and listen to whatever he said. What it meant that his voice could travel past that room through recordings and conversations and the quiet, patient spread of one person telling another. What it meant that he had access, and that access was finite and conditional and subject to revision. And then he thought about what silence meant. Not just his silence. The collective silence of everyone who had a platform and kept the songs and killed the sentences. The silence that accumulated, the way it became the air. The way people started breathing it without noticing. The way it began to feel like normal instead of like absence. He poured his coffee out. He wasn't thirsty. He went to his desk and wrote the sentences. Just a few. He read them back 10 times, trying each time to hear them the way Margaret would hear them, as a complication. As the beginning of a slow fire, as the thing that starts a list. Each time he folded the paper and put it in his pocket anyway. Now he was standing in the wings of the stage with 40 seconds on the clock, and the folded paper pressing against his chest with a weight that had nothing to do with its size. The stage manager looked at him. "Ready?" Jackson took one breath, then another. "Yeah," he said. He walked into the light. The crowd came alive the way crowds do when someone they've been waiting for finally appears. That warm, generous sound recognition and welcome combined. The particular release of an audience that has been sitting in anticipation and can finally let it out. Jackson smiled. He adjusted the microphone. He looked out at the faces. Some he could make out clearly in the front rows. A young woman in her mid-20s, face open and unguarded, like she'd decided before she sat down that she was going to feel whatever the night offered. A man in his 40s near the center aisle, arms folded, but eyes soft in the way of someone who folds their arms not from resistance, but from habit. An older couple near the far side, sitting close together like they'd been sitting close together for decades and had long stopped noticing they were doing it. He played the first song. The music took over the way it always did when everything else fell away. The room filled with it became one thing instead of 1,200 separate things. He felt himself arrive inside the song, not performing it, but living inside its architecture. The present tense of good music, where the past and the future stopped their pulling, and there was only this chord and this word and this particular second of air in a room. When the first song ended, the applause was warm and honest. He played another, then another. Let the music build its trust with the room. Let the crowd settle into that particular ease that comes when an audience realizes they are in good hands, that the person at the front of the stage is not performing above them, but standing among them, saying things that belong to both. Between the third and fourth songs, he stopped. He let the silence sit for a moment. Not dramatic silence, just the natural pause between things. He looked out at the room. He thought of Margaret's voice. "You keep the platform." He thought of the folded paper against his chest. He thought of the young woman in the front row, still waiting with that open face. He reached into his jacket pocket. He unfolded the paper slowly. He looked at it, though he knew the words by memory now. He looked at it because the act of looking at it in front of 1,200 people was itself a statement, a visible decision. "I want to talk about something," he said. His voice came through the monitors, clean and present and steady. The crowd shifted, not away, toward. That particular alertness of an audience that senses they're about to be trusted with something the performer wasn't required to say. "I know some of you came here for the songs," he said. "That's why I'm here too. But I've been thinking lately about what a song is for, about what this room is for, about what it means to have access to a microphone and to use it only for the things that are comfortable." He paused. The room held. "There are things happening," he continued, "that I've been asked not to talk about on stage. Not by a law, not by a threat I can point to, just by the quiet, patient understanding of an industry that knows how to suggest things without saying them directly. And those suggestions carry weight, not because they come with consequences announced up front, but because everyone in the room understands what the consequences could be. A ripple through the crowd, something alive in it. I've been told that if I keep raising certain things, I'll lose the stage. And I've thought about that more than I want to admit. I've thought about it honestly, about whether the platform was more valuable, kept than spent, about whether staying quiet now was a form of patience or a form of surrender that learns to call itself patience. He paused again. The room felt very still. The kind of still that isn't empty, but full. I've decided that a stage I can only keep by being silent isn't a stage I actually have. It's a stage I'm borrowing from someone else, and they can take it back any time. And if that's the condition of the loan, then maybe the loan isn't worth the interest. He folded the paper once, put it back in his pocket. So I'm going to tell you what I know. Not everything. Not perfectly, just what's true as far as I can make it true. And then I'm going to play you another song, because that's the only thing I know how to do that makes any of this feel less like falling. He spoke for 3 minutes, not a long speech, not a performance of outrage or grief, just what he knew. Just the names and the facts and the human costs of things that were happening in the world while the world looked at other things. He said it plainly, the way you say something when you've spent enough time with it that you're no longer afraid of it. When he finished, 4 full seconds of silence passed. Then the applause came, slow at first, then rising, then the kind that fills a room from the floor up, not just from the hands, but from the whole body of people who feel that something real has happened in front of them. He played the next song. The room was different now. He could feel it, not louder, not more excited, not charged with the particular electricity of provocation, just more present, like the 1,200 people had moved from audience to witness, like the distance between the stage and the seats had shortened by something that had nothing to do with feet. He played for another hour. He played with everything he had. He let the songs do what they always did when he got out of their way and let them be themselves. When it was over and he walked off stage, the stage manager was standing in the wings. Her expression was unreadable. Not cold, not warm, the careful neutrality of someone who had a job to do and was going to do it regardless of whatever had just happened. His guitar tech took his instrument without a word, but his hands were gentle, like he was handling something that mattered. In the dressing room, Jackson sat in a chair and let the adrenaline empty out of him the way it always did after a show, slowly, with weight, like sand through narrow fingers. His hands were warm from the strings. His throat was dry. He drank water slowly and stared at the wall without seeing it. His phone was on the table, face down. He didn't look at it. 15 minutes passed. Then a knock on the door. A man he didn't recognize stepped in. Professional posture. Clothes that said he took his position seriously. The careful expression of someone whose job was to communicate displeasure without creating a confrontation. "Mr. Browne," the man said, "I'm with the venue's presenting organization. I just wanted to make sure you're aware of the standard protocol around statements made during performances." Jackson looked at him. "I'm aware of it. Our presenting partners have certain expectations. Their contact information is with my manager," Jackson said quietly. "That's where that conversation starts." The man paused, recalibrating. "Of course, I just wanted to. I understand what you wanted," Jackson said, not unkindly. "Just clearly, and I appreciate you coming in person. But the conversation you're trying to start doesn't start here." The man nodded once, still trying to find a foothold. Finding none, he straightened. "Thank you for your time." He left. Jackson sat alone. He picked up his phone, called Margaret. She answered on the second ring. "I heard." "Yeah." A long pause. "How do you feel?" He thought about the question honestly, turning it over, refusing the easy answers. "Tired," he said, "and something else. Something I don't have a clean word for." Margaret's voice was quiet, intact. He held the word in his mind, let it settle. "Yeah," he said. "That." She exhaled slowly. "Okay, I'm going to start making calls. Not to apologize, not to walk anything back, just to manage the temperature before it manages itself. There are people who are going to want to turn this into something larger than it is. And the sponsorship calls, I'll handle them." Jackson leaned back in the chair. "Margaret, are you angry with me?" The silence before her answer was the real answer. Not empty, honest. "No," she said. "I told you what I told you because I wanted to protect something. I still believe in protecting it. But," she paused, "I've been in this industry for 20 years, and most of the people I work with are brilliant at the music and very careful about everything outside it, and I respect that. I understand why they do it. But sometimes, late at night when the work is quiet, I've wondered what this whole thing would look like if more people used the rooms they'd built the way the rooms were actually built to be used." Jackson didn't speak. "I'm not angry," she said. "I'm recalibrating. Give me a few days." "I'll be here," he said. He hung up. Sat in a quiet room. Outside, the building was winding down around him, the particular sound of a venue being dismantled. Voices fading, equipment cases rolling. The whole massive temporary structure of a concert evening being taken apart and packed away. He thought about the man from the presenting organization, about his careful expression, about the machinery he represented. People doing jobs. Jobs requiring the management of unpredictable human beings who occasionally said things that complicated the commercial agreements holding the whole structure up. He didn't hate the man. He didn't hate the machinery. He understood it. He'd moved inside it for 20 years. He knew its rhythms and its logic and its unspoken rules. He just couldn't follow the rule that night. A knock at the door. Softer this time. He said, "Come in." A young man, maybe 20 years old, stood in the doorway. He wore a crew shirt. His hands were in his pockets and his eyes were on the floor. He looked like someone who had argued with himself for 20 minutes about whether to knock. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said. "I work the production crew. I'm not supposed to be back here. I know that. He stopped, looked up, started again. "I just wanted to say thank you." Jackson looked at him. The young man's eyes were tired in a way that wasn't physical. The particular tiredness of someone carrying something heavy in a place people couldn't see. "My brother is over there," the young man said, "in one of the places you talked about tonight. He's been there for 8 months, and nobody talks about it. Not really. Not in rooms with a lot of people. Like the size of the room would make it uncomfortable. Like what's happening there is okay to know about quietly, but not okay to say out loud in front of 1,200 people." He swallowed. His hands were still in his pockets, and tonight somebody stood up and said it out loud in a room full of people like it mattered. He looked down again. "It mattered to me." Jackson stood up. He extended his hand. The young man looked at it, surprised by the gesture, like he'd expected a nod or a polite smile. But not this. He took it. They shook hands. They stood in the quiet room together for a moment. Not talking, just present. Then the young man nodded once, quietly, and left. Jackson sat back down. He didn't cry, he just breathed. He let the weight of the night settle around him slowly, like something finding its proper place after a long time in the wrong one. In the weeks that followed, some of what Margaret had predicted came true with the quiet precision of someone who'd been right before and knew how being right felt. A sponsorship stalled. A festival booking went unexpectedly quiet. A radio station in a mid-sized city stopped including his songs in rotation. He learned about the radio station not from his manager, but from a listener who wrote to him, confused, wanting to know what had happened. He didn't issue a statement. He didn't give a defensive interview. He didn't go looking for the fight the situation offered. He kept working. He wrote new songs, played smaller shows for a stretch of months, had long conversations with people doing actual work in the places he'd spoken about. People without platforms, without audiences, without access to rooms with microphones. People doing the work in the dark of the world's attention, sustained by nothing except the conviction that the work was worth doing. One evening, about 6 weeks later, he was at a dinner in Los Angeles. A quiet one. Not an industry event, just people who moved in the same circles and occasionally gathered around the same table and called it friendship. A man named Richard was there. Older, respected in a way that meant people listened when he spoke, even if they didn't agree. The kind of man whose presence in a conversation changed its temperature. Richard waited until the noise around them was loud enough, then leaned toward Jackson. "I heard about the concert," he said. Jackson nodded. Richard turned his glass slowly on the tablecloth, looking at it. "I've been in this business 40 years, long enough to have watched a lot of people reach the moment you reached, the moment of choosing." He looked up. Most of them stay quiet. Not because they're cowards, because they've done the math and the math tells them quiet is right. "What about the ones who don't?" Richard's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. Something old and considered. "Some of them regret it. They spend years trying to rebuild what they spent in a single night. Some of them build something different, smaller, sometimes, but more real, more theirs." He paused. "Very few of them stay exactly where they were." Jackson nodded. "I know." Richard looked at him steadily. "Do you know what most of the ones who stayed quiet say years later? When there's nothing at stake anymore and they can say what they actually thought?" "What?" "They say they wish they hadn't." The table noise moved around them like weather they were standing inside of. Someone laughed across the room. A glass clinked somewhere to the left. Richard picked up his drink. "I'm not saying you made the easy choice. I'm saying you made one you can live inside. And those aren't always the same thing. But when they are, it matters." Jackson looked down at his plate, then back up. "A young man came to my dressing room after the show. Crew worker. His brother is overseas, in one of the places." Richard waited, and I thought about what Margaret had said about losing the stage. Jackson held Richard's gaze. "But that young man didn't come to the show because of my career. He came because he needed to be in a room where something true was said out loud, and if I had stayed quiet, he would have sat through 2 hours and gone home carrying it alone. Richard was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded once. The kind of nod that doesn't need words to complete its meaning. On the drive home that night, Jackson kept the radio on low and let the city move past him through the windows. He thought about silence, not as a moral failure, not as weakness, as a choice, a specific daily choice with weight and consequence and genuine logic. He understood why people made it. He respected the logic. He'd held the logic in his own hands that night in the wings and felt how solid it was. He just couldn't carry it. Not because he was braver than anyone else, not because his platform was special or his voice more necessary, but because something in the specific combination of what he'd seen and what he believed and what music had always meant to him made silence feel less like strategy and more like a kind of slow disappearance, the kind that happens so gradually you don't notice until you're already mostly gone. He pulled into his driveway, turned off the engine. Sat in the dark for a moment. He thought about the 40 seconds in the wings. The stage manager counting down. The curtain between him and 1,200 people. The folded paper in his pocket pressing like a small, insistent fact against his chest. He thought about all the things he might have lost by walking out and speaking. He thought about the young man's handshake. He got out of the car, walked to his door, let himself in. The apartment was quiet. His guitar was leaning against the wall where he'd left it that morning. He picked it up, sat down, let his fingers find the strings. He didn't play a song. Not yet. He just sat with the instrument and the quiet and the particular feeling of a person who had made a choice and was still inside it, still carrying both its weight and its relief, still unsure of everything except the single fact that he had said what he meant when it mattered. Outside, Los Angeles kept moving. Lights on. Engines running. The indifferent city doing what cities do. And somewhere across that city, in rooms without microphones and stages without lights, people were going on with the business of carrying things too heavy to put down. Jackson played a chord. Let it ring until it faded. Then he played another. And another. Not performing, not demonstrating anything. Just a person alone in a room, making sound in the dark, because making sound was the only honest response he had to a world that kept asking him to be quiet. And he kept playing. Long after the city outside went still, long after the last lights of his neighbors went dark, long after everything that could be said had been said, and all that was left was the music, which had always been there, which had always been there, which had never once asked him to stay silent.